I met Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend John Dawson, who's with ExactData. John, how are you doing? Nice to see you.
Yeah,
Hey, as we always do, I'd like you to just give a kind of brief summary of synthetic data, and then I've got a couple things I want to talk to you about. I want to get an understanding of how it works and how an enterprise team might write some requirements to use it. But give us a little 101 on how it works.
sure. Sure, Ed. Synthetic data is data that's generated through computer algorithms. It's not, the fundamental difference is it's not derived from production data sources. So we're not accessing it. We're not masking, deriving the data. So it has no way to be re-identified. So the fundamental process is we take system requirements for the algorithms that are under test, the system under test, and the data itself, and then we create what we call a data model. And once we've created the data model, it's literally infinitely configurable, and we can generate data at scale and configure it for those different systems and different test scenarios, and then provide the data to the client, this fully synthetic data to the client. So that's fun process.
So if I'm a bank or something and I've got customer records, I'm just trying to imagine what anybody listening would imagine. Customer record, I have name, address, phone number, social. Are you guys kind of filling in like syntactically and structurally stuff that matches? So it'd be John Doe at 5 Main Street, hometown USA. Is it that kind of thing, or how does the data look when it pops out? Do I have the right image there?
Sure. Yeah, we'll use a bank. I'll use a mobile apping or mobile app, excuse me, development. So on the bank side, you'd have to have all of the banking data, so that the people, and then they would longitudinally progress. They might sign up for different things. They might come and go. They have transaction histories over time. They have demographic distributions. So all of that data, would tell a story over time, and so the synthetic data would mirror that data in volumes and statistical distributions and how it progresses over time. And then if you're, as just an example, mobile app, then you would need a universe of mobile app users too. That would be new or existing that would convert, and those would have to be correlated. In some cases, they would be correlated across those two databases, and sometimes they wouldn't. So that would just be an example of where we would just, instead of using the synthetic data, the production data, we would just generate that synthetically. So it would mirror those two for software development purposes. That would be very, very typical for us.
It has seemed crazy to me from the time you and I first started, you started teaching me about this, that enterprise teams, including DevOps and so on, don't do this as a matter of normal course. It seems like it should be part of the NIST cybersecurity framework. It should be best practice. How are you doing with the security teams? It seems like they resonate when they hear this. So I do want to get into what a CISO ought to be doing, but do they resonate with the message? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. We talked to Tom Mills, who's the CTO at DHS, Department of Homeland Security, a few weeks ago, and his words is, "Wow, we've been looking for something like this." So it's generally lack of awareness. I mean, most of the time they realize production data is problematic. They just don't know of an alternative. In a lot of cases, they're trying to develop their own solutions. So that's a very, very typical reaction. We talked to another CISO you introduced us to last week, and they were actually working on their own solution. They just weren't aware of commercially viable. So there's a general recognition of this being a problem. What's lacking is a recognition that there's potentially some viable commercial solutions out there that they could be investigating. That's just,
it's rewarding, I know, for us as analysts when we find something that seems like a gaping hole. That when we find some technology that fills that gap, it can be pretty exciting. Now, there's probably some people listening who work on enterprise security teams, maybe a CISO or assistant, or just working on that team, who might have source selection requirements for vendors that include POCs, these proof of concepts
Sure.
where you come in. And I know I'm guilty many times of running POCs where you just push the live data and you try and mask it or something. Talk to them right now. What are there requirements they should be writing? Is there policy they should be setting? Is there a test they should be trying? Because this just seems like a superior way to run a POC or any kind of test or development activity, where you're just
Sure.
not exposing live data and dealing with the privacy implications. Tell them what do you think they should do?
Yeah, again, a great question. We would highly recommend that this starts very, very early on in the process, in the development process. So as they're laying out strategic roadmaps and they're coming up with requirements and where they want to go, is that they implement what we call sandbox environments with data. So they'll have data that's fully synthetic, so it can be released out to the public, and it has their specific use cases into the data. So they're not only releasing the data, but the system response file. So how the data of the requirements, but what they want the system to respond to, and so they're giving that out in a sandbox environment. They're releasing it out to industry, either just for people to come back with proposals on how they would solve that problem, or actually as part of the RFP process, so that they could quantitatively evaluate the RFPs. So if that would be a fundamental starting place. It would be very, very different from the way that they're doing it today. So they're defining how they want that system to react and how they're going to measure it, and releasing that out to industry, and then industry's coming back to them and explaining how they're going to solve their problem. That's just a very, very fundamentally different approach that we would highly recommend. In fact, we've done this in the past very, very successfully. The whole procurement process is different when you go about, and the industry loves it too, by the way, Ed, because they like to know how they're going to be evaluated and measured. So start up front, release it as part of the your requirements and RFIs, or how you're trying to define where you're trying to go, and then let industry come back and quantitatively show you how they're going to solve your problems. And then from there, your vendor selection process becomes much easier. When you go into your implementation phase, you can have quantitative ways to have SLA, service level agreements, measuring the vendor's performance, and it just flows through the entire life cycle. And that's what we would recommend.
Have you had much luck at all with compliance, audit, regulatory kind of experts sort of latching onto the concept and deciding that this is something that ought to be imposed on their clients? I've not seen that. Maybe that's something that would be worthy of some effort, so that when an auditor walks into a bank or something and they look at the development test environment, the POC environment, if they see this not there, seems like if you're a competent auditor, this should be the kind of thing you should be demanding. Have you seen cases of that, or is that something that we should expect to see in the future?
We've seen it. And everybody thinks it's a good idea. It hasn't really migrated past that.
Hmm.
Some companies actually have this as policy, and it's just not being implemented. The IRS, is Internal Revenue Service, it's classic. It's been part of the policy for 10 years. It's never been systemically implemented, although they're changing that this year. The common practice there is they process a security waiver. So it might be policy, but they'll just process waivers to use the production data. So they recognize that they shouldn't be doing this. They just don't know what to do about it. And they don't. Generally, the problem is they don't realize that there's technology alternatives, out in the market. And I'm pretty confident you'll see the IRS change that this year. But I'm sure there's many organizations where that's typical. They recognize this is a problem. They just don't know of a good alternative to it, using production data.
If enterprise teams are interested in getting some help, your team there to help? Like, can they give you a call and you'd be able to help them kind of lay out strategy and some requirements and kind of go through an engagement with their vendors? Is that something that you guys do?
Sure, absolutely. We'd love to do that. We, we, like most companies, engineering companies, we want to get involved early in the process. And this, if we're involved or any technology partner, on the enterprise side, is that we could help shape the way these systems are going to be tested. And we call it design for test. It seems fundamentally intuitive, but it's rarely done. So, as you're developing where you want to go, you're also developing how you're going to test for it. And so that what you're buying and it's being done, and then you can monitor it in an ongoing process. So absolutely, we're starting to do that with some of our government customers. We'd love to do that on the commercial side too.
That's great. Well, John, I'm a big fan of this technology. This is something that I see as being such a no-brainer for anyone doing any type of test, evaluation, development, using data. They should be using synthetic data. So as you progress, I think that will have the effect of reducing risk across the whole industry. So keep doing the good work you're doing. And I appreciate you spending some time with us, sharing. And I always learn something new every time we talk.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, John.